Hey there, welcome to the Hot Slice Podcast. This is the podcast by Pizza Today magazine. I am your host, Denise Freer, executive editor here at Pizza Today. And with me is editor-in-chief, Jeremy White. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Denise, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. It's kind of bleak outside, but that's all right. We're all happy and bubbly inside, so it's fine.
Indeed, we are.
That's great. So this week we had some big things happening, especially on pizzatoday.com, because our big industry report went up on pizzatoday.com. So if you haven't read the industry report, go to pizzatoday.com. You can't miss it. It's right up there in the top little rotator. And you'll be able to see so many cool things. Like, I am very excited about all of the fun trends and just different stats that we have this year coming into the industry report.
Agreed. Pizzatoday.com is definitely the place to be right now. There's a wealth of information on the site in general, articles, recipes, everything you need. But the industry report, so much data. It's fun looking at some of the year-over-year change, the comparative data to our first industry report last year is kind of fun. But just digging deep into what we asked pizzeria operators, what they told us, it's really cool stuff. And if you own a pizzeria and you're looking to see where you stack up amongst your peers in terms of processes or sales and everything in between, it's must read information for sure.
Yeah, and if you're looking for new ideas for pizza toppings, or seeing where people are spending their marketing dollars, I mean, that's always good information to see where people are putting their money. The one thing that excites me about this report is that it was dead on the first year about like what was happening. And then when you see the little small adjustments the second year, you get to see like the fluctuations. So that helps me, tells me that our survey is working, that people are giving us some great information. So
no doubt. We will do a deep dive podcast right before the holiday break where you and I sit down and pour through the report and talk about some of the data that has jumped out to us and intrigued us. No doubt we'll do that. But beforehand, we wanted people to just have time to digest it themselves and read it themselves. So definitely go to pizzatoday.com. As Denise said, it's going to be on the homepage and the scroll right across the top. You're going to see it. Click on it and check it out.
Absolutely. It's so fun. And then don't forget, right now, you can still register for Pizza Expo. It's our 40th anniversary, as you can see right here. It's going to be an exciting year for Pizza Expo. And probably my favorite thing that's going to happen this year is the cheese slice competition. It's new, and I'm jazzed for it. I'm ready to taste all of those cheese slices.
I'm in total agreement with you. We did that in Atlantic City at Pizza Pasta Northeast show. It was mind blowing. We talk about it. It's just Spartan ingredients, but the difference in flavors can be crazy. You can have 50 competitors and have 50 totally different tastes, textures. It's just amazing the variance that you can have when it is nothing but dough, sauce, and cheese, and that's it.
Yeah. Now, if you want to register, I'm not sure if that category is closed. So you're going to have to go through the registration and find out which categories are still available for the International Pizza Challenge. But competing is a fun way to get yourself out there. So
it definitely is.
I love it. So, all right. So our guest today is a frequent Pizza Expo expert. So why don't you tell us who do we have on the show today?
Sure. We're going to talk to Peter Reinhart today. Peter is a professional baker. He's a baking instructor. He's a food writer. He's the author of American Pie, My Search for the Perfect Pizza, as well as Pizza Quest, my never-ending search for the perfect pizza, rather, published roughly 20 years apart, where Peter takes an in-depth look at his ongoing struggle, let's call it, to find the perfect pizza. He, again, professional baker, professional food writer, professional speaker, a very accomplished individual, knows a ton about bread, pizza making in general, has talked at Pizza Expo for many years now, has led panel discussions, has delivered seminars on flour blends, tinkering with your dough. He's just a really, he's a great individual, fun to talk to, dynamic speaker, always full of knowledge, very personable, just a great guy to sit down and talk with about bread baking or pizza making in general. So we were very thrilled to bring him on today and learn a little bit about his past and his knowledge, tap into his knowledge, and to tease a little bit about what he's going to do at Pizza Expo 2024 in March.
And this wasn't just a little conversation. We talked for so long that we're gonna break this up into two parts, because he had such great information. We had a great conversation, but it was pretty long. So what we want to do is we're going to break it up into two parts. So you'll see the next part next week, or you'll hear the next part next week. So first off, we're just going to dive right into the bread process, and then how that works into pizza, I think.
Yeah, let's get him on here. Let's get part one going. And again, we'll see you next week for part two with Peter Reinhart.
Performance Food Service is proud to deliver high-quality products, innovative technology, and custom operational solutions to restaurants of all sizes across the country. The flagship division of Performance Food Group, with deep roots in the restaurant industry, Performance Food Service has been the exclusive distributor of the Roma family of brands for more than 65 years. This signature relationship has allowed Performance Food Service to become a leader in the pizza and Italian segment of food service nationwide.
Peter, when you first began your journey, let's say experimenting or learning with breads, pizza doughs, did you originally get into it because of pizza dough, or were you interested in baking other types of bread and then came to pizza down the line?
I've always loved pizza, but it was really through the bread world that I later came into pizza, because it's just how it unfolded for me. I started making bread for fun many years ago, 40 years ago, as an amateur. I started entering like state fairs and harvest fairs and things like that, and one thing led to another. And you know what happens when somebody says, hey, you should do this professionally, you kind of like regret later listening to them. But we did it. He said, okay, let's try it. And before you know it, we got sucked in. But I didn't know anything about, let's say, the science of bread. I knew, sometimes you have a feeling for something, and I was able to kind of figure stuff out. But it wasn't until maybe 5-6 years after I had opened my bakery that the whole artisan bread movement came into being. Now we're talking by now the early 1990s. And I was lucky enough to be on the ground floor of that and attend a lot of the early trainings and sessions and the seminars put on by international baking masters and all. And American bakers suddenly got their game elevated to a whole new level, where we didn't just know how to do it, but we knew why you do it a certain way. And we started learning the science, and the quality of bread in America started to exponentially improve everywhere. And so it was only a matter of time before that kind of leaped over, as the artisan bread community was developing more bakeries that were putting out great bread, and some of the bakeries were starting to add pizza into their mix. And then the pizza makers, who had a great intuition of how to make great tasting dough, said, hey, we want some of this action too. So there's a lot of crossover, and pizza makers, got involved in the bread world. The bread world got involved in pizza. And now I feel it's kind of like one bigger community, because everyone's working together, and what's the word, adding to the general knowledge growth, but also just helping everybody raise their game to the next level.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So that's how it worked for me. I just took my bread knowledge, I started applying it to pizza doughs, and it just coincided very nicely with the fact that now within the pizza community, various regional styles began crossing over, and everybody wanted to know how to do this. I learned how to do this, but now I know how to do that. and the timing's just worked out, and it's been wonderful to kind of be along for that ride.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Were there specific breads that you were interested in early on when you were an amateur home baker? What specific breads were you kind of learning with?
Well, the breakthrough bread for me was, I always have been fascinated by bread. Um, and I was working particularly on a bread. It was a harvest bread that was part of a festival, an annual Christian festival called Michaelmas, where there's a bread that's multigrain, and there was no recipe that existed for it. It was out of tradition. So I kind of decided to take on the project of learning how to create a version of that. And every year I kept, at each festival, I kept tweaking it. And over about 3 or 4 years, I got it to a place where it was coincided with me and my wife deciding to open a restaurant and building it around this particular bread. But the other breakthrough bread, so that was one category, and that's sort of what I call specialty breads, or, celebration breads. But then probably the biggest breakthrough was learning how to make a great baguette following Julia Child's 6 or 12-page, instructions in one of her books that seemed too intimidating to really do, until a friend of mine decided to do it, and his baguettes were so good that I decided to do it as well. And he gave me a photocopy of the pages he followed. I made my first baguettes using her recipe, and I was cooking at the time in a seminary for about 35 seminarians. I was doing lunches and dinners for them every day. And the first night that I put out the bread that I made, and this is in San Francisco, where good bread is around you all the time. So we never really made our own bread. We always bought it. But when I made this homemade bread and the baguettes came out, people flipped out. And that was the confirmation that I was onto something now. And that fired me up. And from that point on, it became a quest to kind of perfect that technique.
Love it. Now, when you got to pizza, I'm curious, was there a light bulb kind of knowledge moment for you where you're like, oh, now I've got it. I've got where I need to go with pizza dough?
Well, I would say there have been moments in which I felt like, wow, that is just taking me to another place. And it started with the bread again, because pizza dough isn't all that different from French bread dough, baguette dough. And then in learning all the different ways that dough could be fermented, using pre-ferments, using overnight methods, cold fermentation, sponges, whatever, all the different options that you have. And then kind of putting 2 and 2 together with, well, why is it that pizza dough, in fact, most pizza places already have good dough, and they don't even know the science of bread making. These guys they just know that their dough's going to work if they follow this. And one of the things that they had in common was with a technique that I had kind of broken through on when I visited this baker in Paris, was the use of overnight cold fermentation to improve the quality of the baguette. This guy had broken all the rules of French bread baking, where they have very set rules, kind of like the VPN rules of pizza dough, in Naples. It was like that in Paris with baguettes. You had to do the 60-2-2 method: 60% water to flour, 2% salt, 2% yeast, so many hours of fermentation, shape it, and it works. And it made a really good baguette. This guy broke all those rules. He was doing wetter doughs. He was holding the doughs overnight. He was doing this long resting periods. And nobody was really interested in learning his technique, even though he was getting pretty good business, until he won the award for best baguette in Paris at a blind judging. And then all of a sudden, everyone, what is he doing that we don't know? And I was fortunate enough to get to meet him, and he walked me through his bake shop, the back bakery area where he did it all, and showed me everything, because at that point, not that many people were interested. So he wasn't trying to protect it or guard it or anything else. And the light bulbs did start to go off for me, because I saw that something happened to the dough. And then it was up to me to figure out, well, what it was. Now I know how to do it, but why does it work? Why does it make a difference? And that's when I really started to make my breakthroughs. And applying it back to pizza dough then. So, well, just the very fact that pizza doughs are usually made the day before at most pizzerias, that alone is a huge game changer for the dough. You could just have the same recipe that that the baguette guy was doing in getting his baguettes out in 6 to 8 hours, and by holding them overnight, that dough is going to make a better pizza and a better baguette than the one that goes and all done in one day. And so that's when sort of this process began unfolding of finding out, number one, okay, why does it work? And then what are all the variations and options that we can do, to apply that knowledge? And again, it coincided with what we saw happening. We saw it every year at Pizza Expo. New pizzas were kind of breaking through and becoming the hot new way of doing it. Whether it was one year the Detroit was like on the center stage, and then the Roman style, the pizza romani came in, and all of them they've been around for a while, but something's happening within the people that are making them that they're applying, whether they've learned it the way I did through going to trainings or just intuitively figured it out, that long, slow fermentation is better.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, when I saw, for instance, when I met Massimiliano Saiva at Expo, and he was doing his beautiful pizza romani long fermentation, and he was doing like a 5-day fermentation on his dough, and a very wet slack dough, and the pizzas were phenomenal. They were blowing my mind, and I thought, this has got to be the next big thing. It's taking a lot longer for that one, I think, to break through mainstream than it did for some of the others, because the technique is not easy, and it goes against most people's training.
And storage, to be able to store a 5-day ferment, that I couldn't imagine what the storage looks like, and the rotation of that storage. It sounds very difficult.
But again, he has this one particular style that he's perfected, and he's not necessarily looking to take it, in different directions. But one change that I have noticed, or at least when we interviewed him for one of my podcasts, I asked him if there's any variations, since I first saw his technique. And he said, well, he thinks now maybe he can do it instead of 5 days, he could do it in 4 days. So does that one day really make a difference? And he says, I'm not sure that it makes as big a difference as I thought initially, and so there are things that, we kind of learn by doing, and other things that you can get it documented by scientific, research. But in the end, it's and we talk about this at our tinkering with your dough workshops at Expo, is that there's a couple things that you can apply that are not rocket science. They're just very easy to apply tweaks that can make a huge difference from taking a dough from good to great. And that's really that's what the quest for me is how do you get from good to great? And so everything I write about, every book I do, everything that I approach, whether it's bread or pizza, it's always trying to answer the question, what is the difference between good and great? And just asking the question starts you down I guess it throws you into a rabbit hole that you can't climb out of.
Right, you can never get out.
And it never does end. It's not like I go, now I've got it, because every time you think you've got it, wow, I've got something better, but is there something even better than this? And then you run into somebody who's doing something that blows your head off, and you want to know how that person got there.
You had mentioned wetter doughs, and that seemingly has been the trend for the past several years, and we're seeing people experiment and push hydration levels. Your favorite dough formula today, and I'm sure it changes every day, but if you're making and serving a pizza today, your favorite dough formula, what's the hydration level like in that?
Well, it partly depends on the flour that you choose to use. And so, because a lot of people, want to use the 00 flours and go sort of true Neapolitan style. Others are using American bread flours. Because of the types of pizzas that I grew up with and love, which were kind of New York-ish style, and quote, now I think the big word of the year last year was Neapolitan-ish styles. That I find that I like the texture and flavor of bread flour and the brand hardly matters. It could be King Arthur, it could be General Mills, it can be ConAgra. It doesn't matter. Bread flour at that protein level, I like it for the Neapolitan-ish style pizzas. If I'm doing trying to do a true New York style pizza, I might go with even a higher gluten flour, like General Mills All Trumps or something like that. Those are 14 or so % protein, and with those you can get a little bit more. You can stretch it, you can beat it up a little bit more. But anyway, all of them are essentially the same in terms of flour, water, salt, and yeast. Sometimes oil, sometimes no oil, but the hydration can vary. So for instance, I find if I'm using, let's say, General Mills or King Arthur, which are the two easy to find flours for home pizza makers who I write for a lot. My Neapolitanish style dough would be somewhere around 68% hydration.
Wow.
And then and if I'm doing if I'm using high protein flour, high gluten flour, I might actually I'll keep it there, but even though the dough will come out a little drier because it sucks up more of the water, but it allows you to kind of like, again, toss the dough and not worry about it sticking to your hands as much. But if I'm doing and that's really sort of a general guideline, but I'll go up to 62%. And some brands of flour, Central Milling flour, for instance, I can put in up to 72% hydration in even their 00 flour, which is surprising because I was using a Caputo 00 flour, I'd probably be down around 64%. Yeah. And some people even go down to 60 to 62%. It just depends on your comfort level and what you like and how long you want to mix the dough and things like that. So there's the guidelines, and then there's the fine tuning that each person kind of brings to it through trial and error and practice. And then on the higher hydration doughs, like a Detroit style or a focaccia, or even, you know, the more recent styles of Sicilian, which I think, and I'm just guessing on this, but I think that the early New York style Sicilian pizzas were probably a lower hydration than the current versions of Sicilian that a lot of people are doing, like what Chris Decker does with his Sicilian. I mean, these are some beautiful pizzas being made in the Sicilian category. Now I work at about anywhere from 78 to 80% hydration on those, and they're real wet, and they're like ciabatta dough. They're so sticky that, you know, you have to have oil on your hands and everything to keep it from sticking to everything. But I love the way that they perform in the oven. And so I've even made pizzas, just Neapolitan style pizzas, on 75 to 76% hydration, if I'm willing to, you know, spend the extra time and care to make sure I don't screw it up, because it's much easier. The margin for error is much smaller. There was this guy in Chicago a number of years ago. He's not in business anymore. He was open for a few years, and he was getting written up and winning all sorts of awards. I think it was called Great Lakes Pizza or something in North Chicago. And he had a really wet dough. And I got to eat there one time, and I watched him make the pizzas. And he clearly was maybe the slowest pizza maker I ever saw in my life. He spent like 5-6 minutes to getting one pizza ready, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way he could be making any money, you know, working at this pace. And he was only making maybe, you know, 30 to 40 pizzas a day. And I think that, and it was him and his wife, and the pizzas were fantastic. And I noticed that he was working even, you know, at this higher hydration level, which is what slowed him down. But it was what made his pizza so great. And so I started doing a lot more of that myself, because I'm not making pizza commercially. I don't have a pizzeria per se. When I consult with pizzerias and help them to try to get more water into their doughs, we're not going up to that level of hydration. But we're getting to where it does require a little bit more sensitivity to handling the dough. But anyway, unfortunately, next time I went to Chicago, they were gone. You know, the place was gone. And I think they just burned out. They were working just as hard as anyone else and not making any money doing it. But people love their pizzas, so hopefully they're doing something fun and creative now.
I love that. You know, something that I think about is when I go to the show and I see Tinkering with Dough, the work, your session, is I notice how many people like line up to ask you questions. So I'm always curious, like, what's the most common question you've ever, or what's the most common question you received, and what's your favorite question that you've received?
Well, the questions can vary depending on whether you're hearing them from somebody who's kind of new into the industry versus an old timer who knows a lot of it already and is maybe just looking for some confirmation of something that they've stumbled on. And so, of course, we love when people who have been doing it for a while ask a question that where they've made a breakthrough and they just want us to kind of like give them feedback, like, why is this working and why am I having success with that? And very often it has to do with hydration, and sometimes it has to do with flour choice. So, but I think that I'll focus on the sort of newbies to the pizza world. And a lot of folks, they come in, they know that the pizza world is a fun one to enter. It's a great community. I call it sort of the tribal experience of the pizza freaks, and they want to be part of it. But they don't really know that much about it. They know that it could be a profitable business if they have a good business sense and they know how to run a business. So so the question they ask me is what can I do to make my dough better? And usually when you ask them, okay, what formula are you following? Very often they have a very fast moving dough, a lot of yeast, shorter fermentation times, trying to make that dough, like I'll make it in the morning and use it later that day. And so the first thing we tell them, and this is, that's why it's a favorite question, is because it's such a radical difference. If I say, listen, cut the yeast down to, and I give them a percentage based on whether they're using fresh yeast or instant yeast, cut the yeast down to this amount, but slow the fermentation down to an overnight. So mix the dough, give it a little time to kind of wake up, ball them up, and put them away overnight in your fridge. And just that one change, without changing anything else in the formula, is going to take the dough to a whole other place. And it's great when you get an email back from somebody going, "Oh my God, it changed my life." So I think that's a favorite question because of the response for those people to it apply. Now, it used to be more common. I'll say, 8-10 years ago, when that question would come up a lot more. Nowadays, most people know more even when they get into it. And if they've been to Expo for even one time, and they've been to any of the workshops that are going on the floor, or come to our workshops, they seem to know a lot of this now coming in. And so I'm trying to think at the most recent one at the Atlantic City Expo that we did. I'm trying to think if some questions came up that sort of indicate a new trend and a new direction. And I think that one thing that I'm seeing there that's and it's a fun question for me to dive into with them is the sourdough question. Because then you've probably seen it. You've seen how that category is exploding. And I think that it's not only exploding, I think it's an important explosion because natural fermentation is really the final frontier of baking. And it forces, number one, it forces you to go slow because you can't really fast proof and fast ferment a natural sourdough. You can by using yeast and sourdough, but everybody wants to do it, and I think it's going to be in some ways a ticket of entry for even existing pizzerias. It's going to be a credibility card to be able to incorporate sourdough fermentation into their mix, because it does produce, when done right, and it's not everybody can do it right, but they can learn how to. It does produce a more complex, interesting dough than yeasted fermentation. Even though you can still make a killer, pizza with just commercial yeast, you don't have to go sourdough. But I think the fascination of it, like I was saying, the rabbit hole of diving into fermentation. Once they dive in, even if they don't want to do it commercially, they still get fascinated by it, and they get sucked into wanting to know the knowledge and understanding, because it's a great metaphor for explaining how life works, because fermentation is a living process. So it's one of those things where they, just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. Fermentation always pulls you back in. It's the great thing. So I think that's why the tweaking panel that we do, and this year we'll be doing it in at the next expo, we'll be doing it with John Arena is rejoining the panel. He's really one of the original members, and we may have a couple guest appearances from former members of the panel, but I think we're hearing more and more questions that have to do with sourdough, because the people are fascinated with it.